There is a difference between a community that disappears and a community that is erased. When a community disappears, there are traces, records that thin out over the years, a gradual silence where correspondence used to be, graves and foundations that persist even after the living have moved on. The process of disappearance leaves a legible record of itself. It says, something changed and the change accumulated, and eventually the place was empty. When a community is erased, the record is different in character. The traces are not thin, they are absent. The absence is specific and clean in the way that something deliberately managed tends to be, and the clean, specific absence is itself a kind of evidence. Evidence that someone decided what the record should contain and acted accordingly. In the spring of 1897, a community of 27 people vanished from a cove on the upper fork of the Little Tennessee River drainage in Robin County, Georgia. The cove was called Wolf Creek Hollow by the families who had settled it and by the surrounding community that had supplied them with the basic goods a remote mountain settlement required. The 27 people, 5 families and 3 individuals living separately, had been established in the cove since the mid-1870s. They had church records, tax records, school enrollment records for the children, correspondence with the county seat in Clayton. They had a full documentary existence as of January 1897. By May of that year, the documentary existence was all that remained. The investigation conducted by the Rabun County Sheriff in the spring and summer of 1897 produced an official finding that has been the source of every subsequent account of the Wolf Creek Hollow disappearance that exists in the Georgia historical record, a finding so brief and so carefully phrased and so deliberately free of anything that would prompt further inquiry that the county coroner who filed the parallel report apparently felt, when he read it, that he needed to say something in his own document that the sheriff's report had not said. He wrote it in the margin of his personal copy of the sheriff's filing, in pencil, in handwriting that became readable only after the document was photographed under enhanced contrast by the Georgia Archives in 2017. This is not all of it. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. 27 people. Wolf Creek Hollow. A coroner's margin note that says this is not all of it. I want to know where you are sitting when you hear what the investigation actually found. Rabun County, Georgia in 1897 occupied the extreme northeast corner of the state, a county of high mountain terrain, dense forest, and the particular isolation that belongs to communities positioned at the convergence of 3 states, where the governance of any one of them thins and becomes unreliable at the edges. The Little Tennessee River drainage that fed into Wolf Creek Hollow from the north ran through terrain that was, in the late 19th century, among the most remote in the southern Appalachians. The road to Clayton, the county seat, was passable for wagons in good weather and extremely difficult after heavy rain or snow. The families who had settled in the higher coves of Rabun County had done so with the understanding that their connection to the county's official institutions was conditional on the weather and the season. In December, January, and February, some of those settlements were effectively cut off from the rest of the county for weeks at a stretch. Wolf Creek Hollow had been settled in 1874 by 2 brothers named Harder, but before coming to that, it is worth spending a moment on what it meant to be a settlement at the far end of a hollow road in Rabun County in the 1870s and 1880s. The county's connection to Georgia's broader administrative and commercial infrastructure was thin even by the standards of the southern Appalachian highlands. The nearest railroad was in Cornelia, 30 miles to the south over mountain roads. The county's tax rolls were maintained inconsistently. The school census was taken by volunteers whose thoroughness varied considerably, and the church records that provided the most reliable demographic accounting of the mountain population were held in individual congregation files that were not systematically collected or reviewed by any central authority. A community of 27 people in a remote cove could exist in the county's documentary life with a degree of autonomy that would not have been possible in a lowland county with better infrastructure. They could, if they chose to, manage what the record showed about them. And if something happened to them, if the community as a collective unit ceased to exist, The record's awareness of that cessation would depend entirely on whether someone with the motivation and the access to notice it happened to notice it. The delivery man from the Clayton General Store was that person in 1897. His route was the thread that connected the hollow to the county, and it was a thread that was severed by road conditions for 3 to 4 months every year. Wolf Creek Hollow had been settled in 1874 by two brothers named Harder, Silas Harder and Owen Harder, who had come from Macon County, North Carolina, with their households and had subsequently been joined by 3 additional families over the following years. The community was not large enough to support its own church, but a circuit minister visited twice a year, and the families used the Harder House as a gathering point for the irregular worship services and community business that the circuit visits occasioned. By 1890, the settlement had stabilized at 27 individuals, which is where the 1890 federal census places it, and where the tax and school records confirm it remained through 1896. The last documented contact between Wolf Creek Hollow and the world outside it was a letter from Silas Harder to the Clayton General Store, dated January 14, 1897, requesting a supply order for pickup when the road cleared in the spring. The letter is in the Rabun County records, on file in the Georgia Archives in Morrow. It is written in the ordinary manner of a man conducting ordinary business, specific quantities of specific goods, a request for a newspaper if available, a note that his wife sends her regards to the storekeeper's wife. There is nothing in it that suggests any awareness of what was about to happen or any awareness that anything unusual was occurring in the hollow. It is a letter written by a man who expects the spring to come and the road to clear and the supply order to be filled. It is the last thing Silas Harder wrote that anyone outside the hollow has read. In April 1897, when the road to Wolf Creek Hollow cleared enough for travel and the storekeeper in Clayton assembled the Harder supply order and sent his delivery man up the hollow, the delivery man arrived at the settlement and found it empty. He noted this and returned to Clayton and reported to the storekeeper, who reported to the county sheriff. The sheriff, a man named Alton Brackett, rode up to the hollow on April 22nd with 2 deputies and conducted the first official inspection of the site. Brackett's official report, filed with the Rabun County Clerk of Court on April 28, 1897, describes the settlement as found in good physical order with no evidence of fire, flood, or violence. It notes that all structures were intact, that personal property, clothing, tools, furniture, household implements, was present in the houses, and that there was no indication of a hurried or distressed departure. It notes that livestock were absent, suggesting that the animals had been taken when the community left, which in turn suggests that whatever departure had occurred was at least partially planned in advance. It notes that the church records maintained by Silas Harder in his capacity as the settlement's informal clerk were present and intact, and that the most recent entry was dated February 4, 1897. It concludes with the finding that the community had departed voluntarily for reasons unknown and recommends no further action pending the appearance of any of the former residents at the county seat. That is the official record. 3 paragraphs. A voluntary departure for reasons unknown. No further action recommended. The coroner's copy of this report, with the pencil notation, "This is not all of it" in the margin, is in the Georgia Archives. The coroner in 1897 was a man named Luther Prine, and he had not been present at the April 22nd inspection. He had filed his own parallel observation report in May 1897 after making a separate visit to the hollow, and his report, filed separately from Brackett's and in a different section of the county records, describes what he found when he arrived approximately 3 weeks after the sheriff's initial inspection. Prine's report is longer than Brackett's by several paragraphs and is written in a different register. Not the clipped concluding language of Brackett's filing, but the more tentative observational language of a man who is trying to describe things he did not expect to see and is not sure his vocabulary is equal to what he is looking at. Prine describes the settlement as Brackett described it: intact, ordered, personal property present. He then adds observations that Brackett's report does not contain. He notes a section of disturbed soil at the upper end of the hollow, above the last of the 5 houses, in a flat area between the creek and the tree line, that he estimates at approximately 30 feet in length and 10 feet in width. He notes that the disturbance is recent, within weeks, and that its character is not consistent with natural erosion or animal activity. He notes that the church record that Brackett had found intact and present in the Harder house is missing its final 2 pages, which Prine assessed based on the binding as having been removed rather than lost, the threads at the spine cut rather than torn. He notes that in one of the outbuildings he found personal documents, letters, a personal journal belonging to a woman whose name he records as Mrs. Owen Harder, that describe events in the winter of 1896 to 1897 that Prine assessed as requiring further investigation. He does not describe those events in his report. This is the most significant omission in the Prine document and the one that has generated the most sustained speculation from the handful of researchers who have found the file. A county coroner in 1897 who found personal documents describing winter events he assessed as requiring further investigation and who chose not to describe those events in his official report was making a deliberate choice. Whether that choice was made because the events were too disturbing to put in a county record, because Prine was uncertain enough about their significance to hesitate before committing them to official documentation, or because someone with more authority than Prine in the Rabun County institutional structure advised him to contain what he was writing. None of these possibilities can be excluded, and none of them is supported by surviving evidence that goes beyond the single document itself. What the document contains is the annotation about the exhibits. What the space where the exhibits would be contains is nothing. That is the full extent of what Prine left behind, and it is simultaneously too much and not enough. He does not describe those events in his report. He writes that the documents are attached as exhibits. The exhibits are not in the file. Whether they were removed before the file was archived or misfiled or never attached despite the notation is not established in any document that the Georgia Archives staff has been able to determine. The space in the county record where they would be is empty. Prine's report concludes with a recommendation that a more thorough investigation be conducted, that the disturbed soil at the upper end of the hollow be examined, and that an effort be made to locate the former residents of the settlement for interview. There is no record of any subsequent investigation being authorized. There is no record of any former resident of Wolf Creek Hollow ever appearing at the Rabun County seat or any other official institution. There is no record of any of the 27 individuals documented in the 1890 census appearing in any subsequent census in Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, or any other state that researchers have checked under their own names. Some of them may have changed names. Some of them may have simply fallen into the category of rural poor who were undercounted in census periods and whose absence from a single county record does not guarantee their absence from the world. But none of the 5 family units documented in Wolf Creek Hollow in 1890, not the Harders, not the other families, appears in any subsequent record under the names they had used in Rabun County. In 2017, the Georgia Archives conducted a systematic digitization of Rabun County records from the late 19th century as part of a broader statewide preservation initiative. The enhanced contrast photography of the Prine report produced the legible version of the margin notation. The project archivist who noted the annotation flagged it in the project documentation and queried whether any follow-up research had been done on the Wolf Creek Hollow case. The project documentation records that the query was received and acknowledged and that no follow-up research was identified. The annotation and the flag are in the project documentation. The file itself remains as Prine left it in 1897, the exhibits absent, the recommendation unacted upon, the question open. There is a detail about the Wolf Creek Hollow case that no published account of it, and there have been 3 in regional history journals in 1954, 1978, and 2019, has addressed directly, which is the question of who removed the exhibits from Prine's file. The Georgia Archives staff, when the 2017 digitization project raised the question, reviewed the handling records for the Rabun County file going back to the earliest available documentation of the archive's custody of the county materials. The file had been transferred from Rabun County to the state archives in the early 20th century as part of a standard records consolidation. The handling records for the period between Prine's 1897 filing and the transfer to the state archives show 3 individuals with documented access to that section of the county records. 2 were county clerks. 1 was a private attorney conducting unrelated estate research. Whether any of them removed the exhibits and whether the removal was deliberate or the result of misfiling is not established. The handling records are themselves incomplete. The 2019 Journal article on the case notes the missing exhibits and describes the situation as a gap in the record whose cause is undetermined. That is where the research stands as of the most recent account available. The hollow that Wolf Creek Hollow occupied is today within the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest. The structures that stood there in 1897 are gone, collapsed, rotted, or cleared in the decades since the land entered federal management. The flat area above the last house site, where Prine noted the disturbed soil, is now a section of forest floor indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. The forest does not record what the soil holds. The soil holds what it was given in the winter of 1896 to 1897, and it has been holding it for 127 years, and nothing has been done to determine what that is. Here is the question that Wolf Creek Hollow leaves behind, and it comes in 2 versions that point in different directions. The first version, a community of 27 people, under pressures we do not know, economic, personal, social, natural, decided in the winter of 1897 to leave the hollow together, took their livestock, removed 2 pages from the church record, left the rest of their belongings, and walked out. People do this. Communities dissolve. The decision to go was perhaps sudden, perhaps precipitated by something we cannot now identify. And the clean absence in the documentary record afterward is the normal consequence of rural people with limited official ties relocating without informing the institutions that tracked them. The disturbed soil is a garden plot, an animal run, something Prine misread. The missing exhibits were never attached. The coroner's margin note is the frustration of a man who found a situation he could not explain and who wrote 3 words in the margin rather than a proper follow-up report. The second version. Something happened in Wolf Creek Hollow in the winter of 1896 to 1897. The church record's final 2 pages described it, and someone removed those pages. The exhibits that Prine attached to his report described it, and someone removed those. The official finding described a voluntary departure because a voluntary departure was the finding that required no further action, and the people in a position to decide what the finding should be were people who had reasons to prefer no further action. The disturbed soil at the upper end of the hollow is the physical answer to the question of what happened to 27 people, and it has been undisturbed in a national forest for 127 years because the question was managed in 1897 by men who knew what the answer was and decided that the public record was better without it. There is one more element of the Wolf Creek Hollow record that belongs here, which is the fate of the January 14th letter. Silas Harder's supply order, the last thing he wrote that anyone outside the hollow has read. The letter is in the Rabun County records because the storekeeper who received it kept it after the hollow was found empty, on the instinct that it might become relevant, and gave it to the county when Brackett began his investigation. It is a short letter, as noted. A practical document, a supply list, a note of personal regards. But the last sentence of the letter, after the supply list and the newspaper request, and the regards to the storekeeper's wife, reads, "The winter has been harder than usual, but we are managing and expect to see you in the spring." He expected to see the storekeeper in the spring. He was writing about the future in the ordinary way that people write about the future when they believe they have one. Whatever happened in Wolf Creek Hollow between January 14th and the date the hollow was found empty in April, it was not something that Silas Harder had any reason to anticipate when he sat down to write that letter. Which of those 2 versions do you believe? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me which one you think Luther Prine believed when he wrote those 3 words in the margin of his copy of Brackett's report. If these hollow communities and absent exhibits and 3-word annotations in old county records are the reason you found this channel, subscribe and ring the bell. The Georgia Archives digitization project is ongoing. Not every file has been photographed yet. Not every margin has been read. This is not all of it. That is still true in 1897. It is still true now. The margin notation and the empty exhibit space and the disturbed soil in the National Forest are all still there, waiting for the same thing they have been waiting for since Luther Prine put down his pencil. The Georgia Archives digitization project has been working through the Rabun County records systematically since 2017. The project archivist's query about the Wolf Creek Hollow case, whether any follow-up research had been done, was filed and acknowledged. The acknowledgement noted that no follow-up research had been identified. The query itself is now part of the digitized record. It is sitting in the archive alongside Prine's report and Brackett's report and the space where the exhibits would be, and the January 14th letter from Silas Harder asking for a supply order and sending his wife's regards. All of it is there. The answer to what happened in that hollow in the winter of 1896 to 1897 is also there, in the disturbed soil at the upper end of the cove, in a national forest where the trees have been growing over it for 127 years. The answer has never moved. It has been waiting for someone to decide it is worth finding.